Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and we're going to be doing something a bit different today on the 53rd, I beg your pardon, a little trouble there, on the 53rd anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision. We thought we'd take the first hour to commemorate that decision and the aftermath of that decision, maybe even celebrate its overturning nearly 4 years ago. But mostly we thought, let's try to have a nice, calm conversation in which we invite our pro-choice listeners to hear again the pro-life position. Because one thing that we have learned over the years here at Catholic Answers is people are willing to listen. That people are good at heart. Most people are anyway. I won't name the ones that I think aren't, but most people are good at heart and willing to listen. And so we have the opportunity not to just rehash all the old arguments, not to just respond in anger or in the kind of competition of ideas, but to say, let's see if we can phrase the pro-life argument in a way that will maybe move the needle with you a little bit, if you'll let us do that. And that's entirely up to you if you would like to listen to that. But I think the essential question we want to ask today as pro-life people who are asking, hey, could you listen to this one more time and see if we can move the needle a little bit with you? Because the law has changed, but we certainly do not have agreement with one another in the United States or around the world about how abortion should be treated or how abortion should be thought about. So I'm going to give a conditional question: if the unborn child is a human being. Because I do think that one of the ways the needle has moved over the course of the years is more and more people have been willing to at least acknowledge this, that the child conceived in the womb, once the fertilization of the egg happens, to use the scientific way of speaking about it, once the fertilization happens, you have a new creature. And the nature of that creature is human. So I think most people are willing to go, yeah, I accept the basic science on that. But then different arguments come in about what that means and what the moral calculus is. So I'm going to assume goodwill on the part of most people, willing to listen to basic science, which says, of course, that my life, your life, all of our life started at a particular moment. And then what happens after that is development. So what we have is a wildly undeveloped human creature. It's a one-celled creature. So if that's the case, I'll start with that conditional. How should a compassionate society respond when both the mother and the child are vulnerable? What should be our response to that fact, to that I think most of us have come to agree on? Although I'm not going to assume that everybody has, so we still have work to do as far as advancing that argument. But I'm just talking in biological terms, because someone might say, well, there's no soul there. I'm just talking in biological terms. We know how the organism, a mammal organism begins. And so I would like to talk, and then I will bring in our guest for this hour, Tom Nash. I would like to just present the pro-life, a history of the pro-life movement that maybe pro-choice people have not heard before. And if you haven't heard this, will it affect the way you think about the whole pro-life thing, the whole pro-life attitude? Maybe. And I wonder if you have heard this story before, because when I talk about the embryonic human creature, actually, we're coming up on the 200th anniversary of science understanding what an embryonic human that the embryonic human creature even exists. There was I think somewhat famous scientist, Carl Ernst von Baer, in Prussia, who in the 1820s did a series of experiments on mammals, and Carl Ernst von Baer is now thought of as the father of the modern science of embryology. He really invented the science of embryology in many ways. So the first organized pro-life movement in the United States is not in 1970. It's not in 1920. It's not in 1900. It starts in the 1850s, because in the 1820s, particularly by 1827, Carl Ernst von Baer had convinced the scientific world of the existence of the human embryo. And this actually had a huge resonance. And it took a couple decades, but doctors began to realize that what they were doing when they aborted early stage pregnancies is not just aborting the pregnancy, but that there wasn't actually a human creature there. Because before that, there was a widespread kind of almost folk understanding of human life, which said, at quickening, we know we have a human person. But before quickening, we don't. There's no science to that. It's just a matter of that's when the woman can feel the baby move. So that was taken as, okay, well, we can all agree there's a life there. So there was a sense before Karl Ernst von Baer that among a lot of doctors that, look, we're taking a human life, we're taking a potential human life. After Karl Ernst von Baer, it began to dawn on doctors who were themselves performing abortions. Wait a second, I could be taking a human life here, and this changed everything. By the 1850s, the American Medical Association, which was trying, certainly there's all kinds of mixed motives here, it was trying to turn, the American Medical Association was trying to turn prenatal care into a more scientific endeavor so that it had a more scientific basis. And so it was trying to raise the status of medical doctors, but particularly one medical doctor, Dr. Horatio Storer from Harvard University, launched a national campaign in the 1850s to oppose abortion. And Storer's argument, and Storer was not at this time a religious person. An interesting fact about Horatio Storer is by the end of his life, he became Catholic. And I don't know if that's related to his views on abortion. But he said, look, if the science is telling us that this is a human, we can't do this. It's unethical. And so this is what we might call the first pro-life movement. It was in the 1850s, 1860s, and 1870s, where there was a growing influence of scientists and doctors telling legislatures of states, you have to stop this. We have discovered something that we did not know before. The human being is present from the moment of conception. This is human life, and we even now know how it develops. So by the 1890s, every single state in the United States had some kind of ban on abortion. Whereas before, it was seen as, well, it's kind of a medical procedure what I'm trying to say to the pro-choice person is, it was science that gave us the pro-life movement originally. It wasn't, now, was the Catholic Church always opposed to abortion? Yes, it was, all the way back to the first century. But not because the Catholic Church knew for certain when life began, but because the Catholic Church was extremely, because of the teaching of Jesus, was extremely careful about the life of each individual, and so wasn't willing to take any chances on this. And also it had a contraceptive aspect to it, which the church also opposed. So it's only after science, after the 1820s with Dr. Karl Ernst von Baer, and then after the 1850s with Dr. Horatio Storer, that legislatures in the United States began to think about the pro-life cause. Guess what? In 1973, with Roe versus Wade, those original pro-life laws are the ones that got overturned. These weren't this wasn't a revolution against the ancient oppression of the church or something. This was a revolution against the science of the 1900s, which had changed people's thinking. I wanted to start there with a little history of the pro-life movement so that you can see it's a movement rooted in science, not a movement rooted in faith. The church has followed the scientific teaching, but they didn't invent it. And we'll come back after the break, because I see I took quite a while there. We'll introduce our guest for this hour, Tom Nash, and we'll do just what we said we're going to do. We'll try to make the case again to the pro-choice person. Could you reconsider your pro-choice views and maybe be open to the pro-life movement, because it might not be a movement that's rooted in quite what you thought it was rooted in. And we'll do that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Hello, friends. This is Deacon Charlie Echeverry from the Living the Call podcast, and I want to share with you a bit about why we need to go to confession. Reconciliation is our moment to speak to Christ honestly about our shortcomings. Confession is cathartic, it cleanses, it renews, and it strengthens all at the same time. If you haven't been to confession in a while, that's okay, but now might be that moment that God is calling you to come to Him and receive the grace of His mercy in the sacrament of reconciliation.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, and we're marking the 51st, I keep saying 51st, I'm stuck in the past, the 53rd anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision. I know in June of 2022 that decision was overturned, but for pro-life people, we still mark this day because the consequences of the Roe versus Wade decision are everywhere. They're all around us. We've all lived with them for decades, and we will live with them until we depart this earth. If we can't have respectful conversations, we can't come to any resolution. So we thought in a respectful way, we would today ask pro-choice people, would you listen to the arguments anew? And we'll try to make them in a way that is respectful. And even the way I pose the question, I hope is respectful, that we're talking about vulnerable women in many cases. Not always, certainly. We don't want to make the pro-life argument where we only talk about the child. And because I think, we'll bring in Tom Nash. Tom Nash is a theologian and apologist here at Catholic Answers, author, has for a long time been a part of the pro-life movement. Tom, I do think we make a mistake as a pro-life movement when we speak of abortion as if moms weren't there.
Yes, you have to. I mean, obviously, moms are there, and you have to start with that, and also start with the male responsibility in his part, because I think behind many, I have a saying that behind every radical feminist is a failed man and/or the fear of one. When you look up somebody. The founder of Ms. Magazine, Gloria Steinem, she had an abortion in the 50s out of wedlock. And so where's the committed male in her life? Kate Millett, who wrote Personal Politics, late 60s, very troubled home with her father being abusive. So I think a lot of times women turn to contraception and abortion as means to level the playing field regarding intimacy. And yet they end up precluding the very love that is a sacrificial, total self-giving love from the men that they interact with, such that oftentimes the man might change, but the type of man does not necessarily. And so you can have serial monogamy, and you're economically independent, but where are you? And then when you do have a child, of course we see this frequently now that with the increased unwed pregnancy, women always get the short end of the stick, and the kids who are raised in such homes are much more likely to have challenges and difficulties in life.
So it does seem to me that there's an important argument here to be made that's in what you just said about the fact that we have to acknowledge that pregnancy puts a woman in a tremendously vulnerable position.
Yeah.
And when society organizes itself in such a way that everybody's just an individual on their own,
yes,
that actually is an argument for abortion, because
autonomy.
Because it's not fair. It's not fair that we leave women alone to deal with pregnancy.
Yes.
That's not fair.
No, it's not.
It's
irresponsible. That's toxic masculinity, if we might point out.
Yeah.
And I remember a person, it was at got rather spirited argument while I was a grad student at the University of Missouri, where I earned my master's in journalism. And the one young lady was talking about the much harder on the woman's body, that is the whole process of pregnancy versus an abortion. I go, yeah, but one takes a life and one gives it. But to your point and to her point, yes, that puts a woman in a very serious position, a precarious position. And it goes back to how are we teaching in our schools about love and respect, and do we do it by, as I would say, with more contraception, abortion, which is putting gasoline on the fire? It's not. It's only going to exacerbate it. Or do we start teaching virtue, which is which could be discussed going back to the great ancient Greek philosophers, irrespective of particular religious beliefs? And I just think that educationally, young people, parents who are, I should say, parents of children who are in more vulnerable economic situations, giving them educational choices, not in terms of people say federal dollars for religious purposes. No, taxpayer rights, letting parents choose, empowering the parents instead of imposing a system upon them. All those things can contribute to, I think, a more pro-life culture. But yeah, it goes back to the men that you have to look at her. Do we see ourselves in solidarity as a nation, and do we look to the government to shall we say, mediate and resolve these issues, or do we, look on the local level?
Well, but it does seem to me that the whole abortion thing it can't be divided from the coldness of our society, from the spiritual coldness of our society. That look, man, you're on your own. Get a job.
Yes.
We don't have a hardy community where people feel themselves integrated into any kind of functional community. And so there's no greater gift to men who want to be misbehaved than abortion. It solved a lot of men's problems.
Nefarious gift, but yeah.
And it's, we got to be honest, a lot of girls who have been violated by men, like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old girls, that problem has gone away for the man because of this freewheeling abortion thing. So abortion solves a lot of problems for men, and it's sold as women's rights. But the thing is, this coldness that we have about marriage, that it's just, it's if my feelings aren't there, it's we move on to the next one. This lack of responsibility for one another, a lack of sense of responsibility,
solidarity.
For one another. It seems to me we have to have compassion on men who feel isolated and devastated by this destruction of community, and on women who they feel. I cannot imagine what it is to be 17, 18, 19, 20, 30, alone as a woman, and you're expected to go through this. Which God made it so that women are, at a certain point in pregnancy, utterly vulnerable. Like she probably won't survive if people don't help her. I mean, in many cases at least,
in terms of the delivering the baby,
delivering the baby, in those last weeks, and the caring for the baby, and what kind of hunter-gatherer does she make? What kind of, it's a condition of vulnerability that God gave us, that men we're able to be cads and just not be there for women.
And I think that aids and abets the radical feminism, because it's
right.
Okay,
I don't want to be that vulnerable.
These are the rules, okay. And I sometimes say that self-induced sexism is like, okay, this is what it takes, but you saw it because it's like, a lot of men can be pigs, but if you jump into the sexual pig pen, you're kind of putting it upon yourself, even if, again, you may be economically independent. The type of man you're going to be drawn to is not one who's typically going to be good for you. And this goes back to chastity and dealing with our passions and cultivating virtue, because otherwise, when it comes to passions, conscience goes out the window, and it's like, oh, we got a pregnancy, or oh, so-and-so now I've been intimate with the person. Obviously, people know that sexual intimacy is something much more significant between a couple than just.
We know it in our bones.
Yeah,
you can harden your heart to it.
And women who are intimate outside, they feel like they got a claim on a guy, even if they're not married, because hey, I've been intimate with you,
and they do have a claim on him.
Yeah, and the problem is though, when the passions are not ordered, then we think about these consequences after the fact, and they impede us from bonding well long term. The more we are promiscuous. Now, people will say, "Oh, it's a matter of economics," and people who are more affluent are less likely to divorce than people who are less affluent. Yeah, but there's other factors too, which are faith, solidarity with the family. It's not simply a matter of economics. And I think this is where, if people are more vulnerable in their economics, give them opportunities, including educational choices, give them support mechanisms to help them be that family in various ways. This is where the government should be all about not replacing the family, but supporting the nuclear family. And if you don't do that, well, God help us. And we've redefined marriage, and that.
But we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
No.
We don't want to say to the gay couple, that's actually not that's not the same thing what you do. We don't want to say to the contracepting couple, no, that's not a full human sexual engagement. We don't want to say to the divorced who have, especially divorced who have children, it's actually not fair to the children. That we want to say everybody, we want to let everybody off the hook about how serious sex is. How morally fraught it is to turn sex into a casual recreational or even transient relationship, and take it out of the context of, look, the man here has to be so devoted that the woman can be vulnerable,
Precisely.
And the woman has to be so devoted that that the child's vulnerability is not violated, that the child can go through its stage of vulnerability.
This is where I think we talk about solidarity. Young women need the support of other women, married women, single women who are living chastity, so that they can be good fathers or good role models of the males, whether it's an uncle or some teacher, a priest, that will encourage them in that. They need to have the solidarity so that they can have the encouragement and if they have a heartbreak without being sexually intimate, it's like, this guy said, unless we're intimate, I'm not going to be progressing. We're not going to consider this further down the road as far as a relationship. It's like they need the support to be able to say no. And men, of course, need to be able to, I think, if men act virtuously, this might sound sexist, the women will follow their good lead, because precisely your point earlier, they're recognizing them as individuals made in the image and likeness of God, and they are in a sense inviting them to a vulnerability precisely because they have their best interests at heart.
Right.
They're going to be totally committed.
Right. And men and women cannot be fulfilled if they can't be vulnerable with one another. But I have to say, in practice, women, in actual point of fact, the way if you talk to older couples and whatnot, it's often the woman who sets the rules, and the man has to when she is clear that she's not going to put up with certain things from this guy. I've had my wife tell me when we were young about certain things. Look, she's just not going to put up with it.
It's good. It's good communication.
And it's good for you as a man to know. She needs this is not a game. There's things that I got to do. I got to step up. And often, I think women do play the role of getting men to step up. And and so we discourage young women from doing that because, I don't know, what you don't want to be needy or demanding, or that woman. You have a right to say, look, here's the deal. And
yes, calling them to be a man.
Right. And I think it's good for us men when women do that. Like, do you know that, you going out and say partying after work, that's not going to work anymore. We got kids now,
Yeah.
Or whatever the thing is, whatever the thing is that you need to be called
up. You can't go out with the boys as much.
I agree with you that men need to set this higher standard so that women have room to be able to be women. And part of being a woman, especially when it comes to motherhood, is being vulnerable. And I think sometimes people hear that as that's an insult to women. No, that's the way God made it. A woman has a really hard job bearing a child and giving birth to that child.
No doubt.
She will be medically vulnerable. She's like
my friend said in grad
that's the nature
school.
of the thing. So I'm not saying women are weaker than men or less than men. I'm saying that nature puts women in a position, nature and nature's God, let's say,
Yes.
of vulnerability. The whole thing of male monogamy, and you can't, Jesus is teaching you can't just divorce a woman, all of that is meant to protect women.
And
it's
children
not meant
and the
to
families.
be an imposition on my individuality. It's supposed to protect women who face a natural difference from men. So when we come back, all right, we talked about that part of abortion. Let's talk about the baby when we come back. Let's talk about that little teeny tiny vulnerable baby on Catholic Answers Live. What is the Catholic Church? Everybody seems to have an opinion, but the church never quite fits into the boxes people try to make for it. In The Faith Unboxed, author Andrew Petiprin looks at some of the most common boxes people put the Catholic Church in and explains why they don't fit. In doing so, he brings us closer to what the church really is, the institution founded by Christ. Order The Faith Unboxed today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Why do Catholics pray to dead people, bow to statues, venerate relics? And where do we find any of this stuff in the Bible? In the delightful book, The Saints Pray for You, Dr. Carla Broussard convincingly defends the ancient Christian belief rooted in Scripture that the saints care for us, that they're our allies. Order your copy of The Saints Pray for You today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
The stigmata, the appearance of Christ's wounds on ordinary believers. Is it real or fake? What's the evidence? And if real, what could God's reason be for causing this? In God's Wounds, author John Clark offers what may be the most thorough, honest, and faithful reckoning with the stigmata ever written, examining the evidence and making sense of it both medically and spiritually. Order God's Wounds today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. If you're just joining us, we're doing a pro-life hour this hour, but we're trying to do so in a slightly different way to ask pro-choice people on this 53rd anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision, would you be willing to hear the argument one more time and maybe reconsider the pro-choice argument? And under the basic question, if the unborn child is a human being, how should our society, if it's going to be a compassionate society, respond to both the mother and the child and their vulnerabilities? And so we talked a bit about the fact that God has established nature, or if you don't believe in God, at least nature has established that women are made tremendously vulnerable by the bearing and birthing of children in a way that men are not. And our society is just not set up for that vulnerability. Our cold, individualistic society. I don't believe in the warm glow of collectivism. I don't want to, but I do believe in community and love for your neighbor. And our society has become cold to look at this is one of the most basic natural. It's probably the most basic natural vulnerability. Is the vulnerability of the woman who is pregnant, and the response to that in a society that says, look, you're on your own, is often abortion. So now let's turn to the child a little bit. And Tom, you've been in this pro-life movement for so long. I do want to say something. I think that there is a fundamental flaw that means the pro-choice movement will eventually shrink and go away as a major force in the world. I don't know if it's going to take 100 years, 500 years, or 1,000 years. But the basic problem is you cannot get around the facts of abortion, and the facts are that a human life is taken in an abortion. And I will go back to Karl Ernst von Baer and Horatio Storer and the scientists and doctors of the 19th century who discovered this. And look, you go to an embryology textbook and it tells you when the life of a mammal begins. It begins at fertilization. So I think there is and this is why I think sometimes we don't get arguments. We just get, well, you're a man, you shouldn't be talking about this, or other kinds of appeals to anything but reason. Because at root, fundamentally, if you could organize, everybody I think knows, if you could organize a society justly and fairly so that every person is taken care of, you would still end up with this fact that there's a child present there. There's a human being present there. And so the society, people would go, well, it's still not just if we're taking the life of that child. And so I do think there is a natural human, God put it in us, a tendency towards fairness, and it's unfair for born people to kill unborn people. And I think people know at root that unfairness exists, and it can't go away because the science can't change. I mean, of course, new insights can come up, but a basic scientific question has been settled. When does the life of a mammal begin? It begins at fertilization, or what we sometimes call conception, although I use fertilization because I think the embryologists are more comfortable with it. So this brings me to a question. You did an interview when you were a young lad, hundreds of years ago, when you were a young lad. You interviewed the president of Planned Parenthood.
Or not the president, the local head.
Local head of
in
Planned
Ann
Parenthood.
Arbor, Michigan, which
Okay.
is where the University of Michigan is at.
And I want you to just tell us about that conversation, because it goes back to my point that there's a fatal flaw in the pro-choice argument. And I know a lot of pro-choice people just turn the radio off when they hear this, but I'm asking you don't turn it off because it is a fatal flaw. You're never going to get away from the fact that a human life is taken in abortion. And you're never going to get away from the fact that people don't like unfairness. And so the pro-choice argument is going to lose. I believe that firmly. Like I said, I don't know if it's going to be 1,000 years from now. But just as the pro-slavery argument eventually lost, just as the pro-gladiator argument eventually lost, the pro-choice argument must fail because it's not fair. And people just have a natural, over time, inclination to say, I don't want the world to be unfair.
Not to be just.
They want it to be just. So tell me about this conversation you had back in when, the 1980s?
Early 1981, January, February. It was wintertime, taking a journalism class at the University of Michigan. And so I went over to interview the head of the Planned Parenthood. It was on North Main Street in Ann Arbor. Her name is Margie Crow. I truly wish her well. I looked online recently, and yours, and she's still, I don't think she's still working for Planned Parenthood, but just I pray for her and her well-being. And this is part of the whole thing of the pro-life, is where you have to love those whom you oppose, realizing that the devil and his minions are only irreversible enemies.
Right.
But in speaking to her, I quoted from a Planned Parenthood pamphlet from the 60s, which I had read in the book by Dr. Jack and Barbara Wilkie, the their pro-life booklet, not their booklet, but it was a book that they had. Anyway, I quoted the Planned Parenthood pamphlet, which said, an abortion from 1963, by the way, Cy, 1963.
So this is the Planned Parenthood pamphlet from 1963.
Yep.
Okay, so what did it say?
An abortion requires an operation. It kills the life of a baby after it has begun. It is dangerous to your life and health. So I said that to her, I quoted to her, and she responded and says that, yes, abortion was dangerous to a woman's life and health, more so back in 63, but, we've made medical advances since then, so it's no longer dangerous to a woman's life or health otherwise. And I smiled and I responded, I said, okay, but what about that first part, that abortion kills the life of a baby after it's begun? Now, what new information has Planned Parenthood gained to determine that an unborn human person, is not really a baby, is not really a person? And she paused, and then she simply said, this interview is over. And I just said, okay. But you talk about the fatal flaw,
Yes.
She recognized it. It was like checkmate, and the only way you do is kind of like turn the board over. and had to short circuit it. And she realized that, and it's like, it's not like, well, we those scientists that Cy was talking about, all these other things, really not the case. We've come to some greater realization. This is ironic too, because in '65, I remember this being on I was only 3 at the time, but
you were in college, right?
I was in college.
I remember you were very smart.
I was a prodigy. Yeah,
3-year-old.
But that Life magazine, which had the Leonard Nielsen's photography about the unborn child, it was one of the best-selling ever. If you recall this one, people can look online, 1965, from Life magazine, which had all these photos of the unborn development of an unborn baby. So that was 2 years after that pamphlet. So to try to deny, I think you have to go into semantics and say, well, this is really not a person. Well, wait a minute, you guys called it a baby. Now we're going to say, well, yeah, it's human, but it's not a person, therefore it doesn't have rights. But your point is exactly right, Cy. It's a matter of development thereafter. And I said, if you want to look at the difference between a mere cell versus a fertilized human ovum, chronicle them for 9 months in a human mother's womb and see what happens.
That's Dr. Carl Ernst von Baer's basic insight about development in the womb, which can never be overturned. This is the truth about I can never be overturned. It's just as solid.
It can't be overcome in terms of its logic and truth, basically.
Right. So, it was this. He was investigating to see, when does the life of a mammal begin?
Yes.
And I think Carl Ernst von Baer, if it had begun at 20 weeks of pregnancy, he would have said 20 weeks of pregnancy. If it had been, but he chased it all the way back, and he said it's the same organism. What makes it that organism? It's the fertilization of the egg by the sperm. That's the way he spoke about it. So the fertilization of the egg made a new organism. The difference between that organism and Tom Nash is development.
Yes.
It's not different in nature or kind. Now, I'm not trying to make up science. This is such old science that it's in every embryology textbook. Everybody knows from their high school biology that life begins and then it develops. It's not a question of life is in potential or something. It begins and then it develops. Those are the two things. Now, what is the moral value of the creature at 10 weeks of development or 20 weeks of development? Okay, now we have to do some philosophy and some theology and all of that. But so I don't deny that. I'm just saying scientifically, the biological life of the creature, this is an unovercomable fact that the pro-choice movement must face. You developed from a single cell. I developed. We didn't begin our life at a later point. We developed from that point. So it is a human creature. Now, I remember when by the way, good job on that interview. It's really good to have a good, strong follow-up like that. That was very good.
Yeah, I mean, I was ready, and I like a good debate, being an apologist and all, but even back...
But I remember, like, before they overturned Roe v. Wade, like maybe 5 or 6 years before, states were trying all kinds of things. They were just... It was all these test cases to try to... And so one of them was a ban on abortion after 20 weeks.
Yes. And
many people were horrified by this. So I remember someone taking a picture of a developing human fetus at 20 weeks and putting it on Facebook. And it made people really mad because you know what it looks like? It looks like
it looks like a human person.
It looks like a baby. And so I'm not saying looks like is the criterion for is.
No, it can't be.
That's not but I am saying, like, there is a point at which there's no more question. Like, I can see someone going, I don't see a human being when they see an embryo. I don't see a human. Okay, seeing is not the same as knowing.
Precisely.
But the fact is, by 20 weeks, you can both know and see.
Remember the Doritos commercial, Super Bowl 50, where
the
kid wanted
the baby wanted a Dorito.
Yes, and the mother, they said, "Oh, look at this is fun." And the guy, and then he takes it away, and then the baby's reaching, and obviously the baby's upset, and that makes mom. Speaking of vulnerable positions, but NARAL was calling it an anti-choice ad that humanizes the fetus. It's like,
But
well,
we're not
that-
humanizing the fetus. It's called a human fetus.
Yeah,
you can't humanize a human. Like you can
No.
dehumanize it.
No.
And look, I'll give you an example. When and this, I know this is brutal and probably too emotional of an appeal. So I did want to be careful not to make. But look, when Columbus came and discovered the Americas,
yes,
and the people have a brown tint to them, and they don't live the way the Europeans live, people thought these will make pretty good slaves. So they said they don't reason like we reason. They don't have the same reasoning capacity we have. And the argument was, I don't see any evidence. And these are written arguments. You can go back and read them. These are actually arguments that were in court cases that were made. And the argument was
whether they be Native Americans or imported Africans.
Yeah, but I'm talking about up against Native American people. Was they don't reason like we reason. And the arguments had to do with, well, their societies don't look, their dress doesn't look like us, their religion doesn't look like our religion. They're not the same kind of reasoning creature we are. So that meant you didn't need to respect them in the way that you respected European people. And you could... Now, eventually, those arguments lost in European courts. But originally, early on, they won, and then they came to be lost. Well, this is analogous. It's not the same. I'm not saying you're making the same argument that enslaved the people of America, but it's an analogous argument. If you say, well, there's qualities missing there that make this recognizable to me as a human being, and as long as those qualities are missing, I won't accept it. And one person might say, well, they don't have our religion, or they don't have our skin color, or they're not as tall as we are, or whatever the argument is. Or they live closer to nature than we do. So they're not the same kind of creature. Look, the argument that won is the correct argument. The person native to the Americas has all the same rights, and so that you have people like Francisco Vittorio making the argument quite eloquently as a priest and a theologian and a philosopher. They have the right to their own commerce. They have the right to their own society. They have the right to choose whether or not they want to be baptized. All of that stuff that eventually won. It's good that won. You know why? Because that's fair. And those are the same arguments that should win as far as the unborn child goes.
And it's just because any time we've seen in human history the process of dehumanizing someone, whether in Japan they called them the logs, L-O-G-S, and so that was their way you dehumanize. Some people
Who got called logs? I don't know.
Some of the people who within World War II. I'm trying, but and you got the Bataan Death March. But in other words,
where they were treating non-Japanese people as less than Japanese, as less than human,
and they call them logs. Or you talk about in Hitler's Germany, or racism in the South that seem these people separate but equal. That all this stuff is an attempt that they're not like us. It's dehumanizing them, even though they're out of the womb and grown, like you say. So if we can do it then, are we surprised that it's done earlier? But you're right. You're talking about intrinsic value, intrinsic dignity, and it begins at conception. That is when the human organism, the human person begins. It's
right, and the fact that
it's incontrovertible.
And lacking the qualities doesn't make us less human. That would to do that would be to say, well, a person who's severely disabled is somehow less human because they're lacking
and
qualities.
That's why we see movements toward euthanasia.
Well, let's talk about the culture of death then, which is a consequence of this Roe versus Wade mentality. This, people that's a slippery slope argument. Do you know why people make slippery slope arguments? Because humans keep getting on slippery slopes and sliding down them. So let's talk about that.
It's expedient.
Argument about actually human beings of all kinds are less valued when you treat the unborn as valueless. We'll do that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Mother Angelica had a simple goal when she began EWTN: to reach the world with the gospel message. EWTN is the most trusted source of authentically Catholic content on the air today, featuring Mother Angelica, Teresa Tomeo, and Father Mitch Pacwa. We've never wavered from our mandate to proclaim the truth and majesty of the Catholic faith. Thank you for joining EWTN in this mission.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I want to make the Franciscan argument for life, and not Franciscan Saint Francis, but Franciscan Pope Francis, because Pope Francis was an extremely pro-life person who was also kind of popular in the world because he was kind of an eco-friendly pope. He was he stood up against colonization of peoples, and so his pro-life credentials are in a context of a view of the world and of the human person. And I got to say, I think Pope Francis got his pro-life stuff exactly right. I think right on the money, because he put abortion in the context, which he, by the way, compared to hiring a hitman. He wasn't always very politic in the way that he talked, but he put abortion as we practice it now in the world within the context of the consumerist throwaway culture. And the basic argument was that when a society decides that some human lives are inconvenient, costly, or unwanted, it teaches itself to discard people instead of caring for them. So just like we throw away that paper plate, we begin to have the or whatever we might throw away. Abortion is not just a private choice, according to what Pope Francis taught us. It reflects a culture that solves problems by eliminating the vulnerable, by throwing away things that impinge on our lives. So this throwaway culture that he talked about, a truly humane society, according to Pope Francis, would be measured by how it protects those who are smallest, weakest, and unable to speak for themselves, not by its efficient cutting them out. And so I would just like to talk about Canada for a minute here, Tom. When we talk about the spread of what Pope John Paul came up with was this idea of the culture of death, that when you begin to integrate killing into your society as an accepted part of that society, you're going to lose control of that integration, and there's going to be more and more killing. And he wasn't wrong about that, because now what you have is a culture of death, a culture that Francis would call a throwaway culture, John Paul II would call a culture of death, and that is we solve our problems by means of killing. And what do you think about what you see in Canada as a consequence of, say, Roe versus Wade?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Could you connect those two things?
Sure. And I think the problem, people, we talk about radical individualism or autonomy, and yet when we embrace it, we invite the government, because we're basically calling it a good, and the government will step in and promote it as such. And therefore, people who are vulnerable are much more likely to be, whether it's the unborn child or the vulnerable person for whatever reason, older in age, to be euthanized, and to be euthanized against their will, because they become expendable, they become a burden.
Yeah.
And so you see that in Canada, God bless them, our northern neighbors. Although I do love Canada, they still have God in their national anthem, in all sincerity. But here in America, we are moving in that direction, because more states are talking about, some assisted suicide laws are in place.
Right. So now we begin to expand death as a solution. Death becomes a solution to illness. Death was a solution to the vulnerability that comes with pregnancy. Now death is a solution to illness.
And if it's a solution, then the government can and should promote it. And of course, then the more vulnerable become even more vulnerable and are more expendable, as you say.
And then you get a society where I think you remember the famous case of Iceland celebrating the fact that it
no
had
more
cured
Down syndrome.
They cured Down syndrome in Iceland, and the greatest response to that was Patricia Heaton. I don't know Patricia Heaton. I never met Patricia Heaton, but I'm going to love her the rest of my life for her response to that. Because it was
everybody loves Raymond, by the way.
Yeah, the mom on not the mom, not the older mom, but the Raymond's wife on Everybody Loves Raymond.
There you go.
And I think she loved Raymond, but it was a particularly fraught kind of love that she had for Raymond.
Back to Iceland.
But her point was, you didn't cure Down syndrome, you killed all the people who have Down syndrome.
And my little sister had Down syndrome.
And this is why I love her for saying that. She's not just me or you saying that. You know, I'm paid by Catholics who want the pro-life message to get out. She's paid by Hollywood. You know, that's where she makes her living. I think that's gutsy to say something like that.
And it was exactly right, because that's what they did. And I know that, you know, my little sister, Mary, God rest her soul, she, they didn't expect her to live days or weeks, let alone months or years, but she had Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Lived 42 years, praise God. I attribute to her tenacity, God's blessing, and my parents' love, family, and everyone. But yes, I mean, but isn't it say something about conscience that Iceland felt compelled to say something, like to justify, hey, we've eliminated it.
Yeah.
It's like as opposed to we feel like we have to justify it. It's like, you know, getting it's confession without absolution.
Yeah.
The fact that they needed to trumpet that, and it's like, take a look. You've done it by killing people, not by curing it.
Well, the thing is, would it be better if we could cure Down syndrome? Yes, it would. Would the world be better without people who have Down syndrome? No, it would not. Like, you have to hold both of those things.
No, it's true, because anybody who's interacted with Down syndrome, children, adults, there's a love, and there's also you don't see this whole thing of keeping a grudge and keeping statistics. There is a detachment from that, and there's a real true love, and for people of various situations, you see God's joy and His love manifest in the lives of the unborn. And Down syndrome children.
But I have to say something that we in the pro-life movement have had to learn from the pro-choice movement.
Yes.
Was pay more attention to the mom.
Yes.
And we are now learning, pay more attention to the family who has a disabled child, or pay more attention to the disabled person. And I want to say to the pro-choice movement, that's good that you pushed us on that. I don't believe in the argument, all you care about is the baby before it's born, because that's not true. When you get to people in the pro-life movement, these are people who are many times actively caring for for people well outside the womb. You know, so I never thought that was a good argument, but it's good pressure on us to go, because it's easy to forget about the family who has the disabled child, who, guess what, their life is really hard, and we got to do a better job. And so I feel grateful to the pro-choice movement that it's a pressure movement to live. Okay, you want to have that pro-life standard? You better live it consistently. And the pro-life people go, you're right, we do have to live it consistently.
And I think part of that consistency is to support them in educational choices while their kids are growing up, instead of assigning them. Many presidents would say how we don't send our kids to the D.C. public schools in a tough area near the Capitol. Or the White House, they would send them to other schools, private schools, which is rather inconsistent, to say the least.
If I can say that, thank you to the pro-choice movement for pushing us on our own values. I want to push you on your own values, and that's what we've tried to do this hour. Next hour, we're going to take some questions. But if your values are about fairness and about the dignity of the human person and about human rights, consider again the pro-life position. It's not an anti-woman position. It may have been espoused as an anti-woman position by some of us in some times, but you pushed us and you taught us. And now will you be open to the pro-life position? Give it a try. I think we can meet each other. I really do. We'll be back in just a minute with more. Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kelly, your host. Darren and I are a little out of sync today. Are we out of sync a little bit? We're a little bit out of sync. I'm not sure when the mic's on. He's not sure when I'm going to talk. But we're glad you're back for a second hour. We got, you know what we like to do every now and then around here? And we have these drop calls that happen. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking the reason those calls dropped is because Cy pushed the wrong button. And that's a fair assumption on your part, but it's not always the case. I think you have evidence to back up your assertion, but it's not always the case. Sometimes the caller just doesn't stay on the line, but we're like, oh, that would actually give us an opportunity to have an interesting conversation, that question. So we save them up and we share them with the dudes when they come in. And Tom Nash, apologist, theologian. How long have you been involved in Catholic media, Tom?
Oh,
since the writing of the Bible?
not quite that long. 35 years or so.
Yeah.
In various ways.
So and so you've seen the growth and the changes and all of that. You've been there at EWTN. Were you at Ave Maria Radio for a while?
I did some work at Ave Maria for a while, and also did a little bit of fundraising, and they also were very helpful in the first edition of my book on the biblical case for the Catholic Church.
Oh yeah.
In terms of supporting me in that regard. So grateful to our friends at Ave Maria Radio, based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And my various friends there, Marcus, Peter, and the whole gang.
By the way, in case you don't know it, Tom is a complete partisan of Michigan. Everything from Michigan is good. Everything from any other state, not so good.
Not
Anything
true.
from Ohio,
Not
terrible.
Not true.
He doesn't believe in airplanes because they were invented by people from Ohio. Why? You hate Ohio so much, Tom Nash.
That is not true. And don't say that, since we're moving to Columbus, and I have godchildren who are Buckeye fans, so stop it.
You have godchildren who are Buckeye fans?
Yes, I do. Just showing that.
Did you show up to the baptisms?
Of course I did, and I also congratulated them for all those years that they beat Michigan in football.
You're actually wearing red right now. You're actually.
Yes,
I'm giving you a hard time, and you're not even wearing Michigan blue.
Well, that was a gift I received years ago, and it works.
All right, I'm going to give you some questions then, Tom Nash. I don't know why I start the show by picking on you. It doesn't seem like me.
Especially when we're going to Columbus, don't put a target on me. Well, Cy Kellett said.
All right, so Carolyn was in Illinois. Do you like Illinois, or do you hate it as much as you hate Ohio?
I don't hate Ohio, and I don't hate Illinois. What is the question?
Do you have any feelings about Illinois, or you just go on?
I wish Illinois well.
All right. This is what Carolyn was going to ask. I saw a mass on EWTN that seemed to have married priests or priests from other countries passing out communion. Carolyn wants to know, is that okay?
Well, if it are priests from other nations, other countries, that's perfectly fine, because the church is universal. When Jesus said, make disciples of all nations, that means the whole world, and that's what Catholic means, universal. So if these priests are in good standing, whether they're from a country, United States of America, or from some other country, that's perfectly fine that they are distributing communion, celebrating Mass, etc. If there are married priests, there can be, in the case of the church makes allowances for that, for particularly with Anglicans who were married prior to their becoming Catholic, and they been married for a number of years, like our friend Father Ray Ryland, who was the spiritual advisor here at Catholic Answers, also where I used to work, Catholics United for the Faith, a great man. He was married. He grew up non-Catholic and was an Anglican priest and be Episcopalian, and eventually was ordained. So you do have those exceptions. But and then you also have in the Eastern rites where they can be married, but they need to be married before they become priests. And then, of course, their bishops, by their own choice, this is the Eastern rites, are not chosen, as well as the Eastern Orthodox, who are not in full communion with the church. They only choose their bishops from unmarried priests.
Just in case Carolyn doesn't know, what is an Eastern Rite? What are you talking about when you say
Eastern Rite? These are people who, it's not the Latin or Roman Rite. There are 22 rites off the top of my head of the church, and so these would be like Byzantine or Maronite, for a good number of years they were there was a separation between East and West, and several hundred years ago there was a reunion, and the bottom line is what we could say, that they may be Eastern Rite Catholics, but they are in communion with Rome, recognizing the primacy of the papacy. So again, that's another example of showing universality, that legitimate diversity within universality, that unity need not imply or denote uniformity. There can be a diversity of worship forms.
Carolyn, thank you
Still
very
the same
much
Mass.
For getting us started. Now, we've already established, I believe, that you like Canada.
I do.
So this one comes from Nathan in Newfoundland, Canada. And he was listening on Twitter. Some people call it X. I refuse to call it X. He was listening on Twitter and said, if the traditional Latin Mass is a valid form of worship, why is it being suppressed?
I think there can be various arguments. I think sometimes Pope Francis would say, some of these people are denying the legitimacy of Vatican II. And so in trying to, they would go to a TLM Mass and they would say, hey, it depends on the people, some people more than others. And I think by arguments to try to foster unity, that they were trying to marginalize it, whereas Pope Benedict XVI had encouraged it. And it was an interesting case, and we'll see how things progress with Pope Leo, that yes, there's no doubt it's a valid form of worship. Ultimately, though, we need to be docile to our bishop and make our appeals to Rome if necessary. But there can be arguments where, again, because people say, well, people in this particular group tend to be more critical of the Vatican Council. Well, that need not be the case, and some people might prefer the TLM, and that's why many dioceses, for example, the Diocese of Lansing, of which I've been a part of in Michigan, Bishop Earl Boyer has allowed many TLM masses. So it depends on the bishop, it depends on the country, and it'll be interesting to see how it develops. But I think that ultimately we need to be docile to our bishops and realize that even if our particular form of the Mass, a particular rite is not permitted, that we need to be faithful and not look into ecclesial communities, people, I should say ecclesial communities, but groups that are not in full communion with the church.
Yeah.
Because then all that glitters is not gold. You can talk about all the beauty of the Mass, but if you're not in full communion, well, then you've got some real issues, especially if you are willingly doing something. If you participate in a local parish Mass and the ordinary form, post-Vatican II rite, and something goes wrong there, well, that's ultimately on the local priest or the bishop. You're still in union because that's not on you, but when you make that willful decision to go to a Mass that is celebrated by a priest who is not in full communion, and some who might not even recognize the Pope, God forbid, but there are those things called sede vacantes. They believe the seat is vacant. That's a big problem. So I think there are concerns, in summary, that Pope Francis, and I wouldn't necessarily agree, because I think you can have unity with diversity, but there was concerns, I think, some of them more valid than others, that people who were going to the TLM, of course, he would talk about being rigid and things like that. And I think that was stereotyping. But that's where I think some of it started, where it was kind of like we're off on our own, we're by ourselves, and we're not, or that was the perception, or that's how they were cast. And some of the people that were more vociferous, who might have been critical of Vatican II and some other things, that gets played up upon. But there are many people out there, Catholics, faithful Catholics, who participate in traditional Latin Mass and are good Catholics and faithful Catholics, and they're being supported by local bishops. But if I would just only say again, remember that it's the apostles, successor to the apostle, we have to be faithful to and to follow his directives. And if there's an issue, then appeal to Rome, because this is the structure our Lord has given us.
I hope that's helpful to you, Nathan, up there in Newfoundland, Canada. Thank you for the call and the question. I'm sorry we weren't able to take it live, but I'm glad we were able to take it now. We're going to take a very quick break and be right back with more drop calls for Tom Nash on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live. Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Mother Angelica had a simple goal when she began EWTN: to reach the world with the gospel message. EWTN radio services transmit 24/7 on over 500 domestic and international AM and FM radio affiliates, satellite radio, and web streaming. We've never wavered from our mandate to proclaim the truth and majesty of the Catholic faith. Thank you for joining EWTN in this mission.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Drop calls for Tom Nash. And I'm supposed to tell you this, though. Look at this. I really am actually happy to talk about this because I got to write a book with really one of the great evangelists of our time, Steve Dawson, the founder of St. Paul Street Evangelization. And the book is called How to Talk About Jesus with Anyone. And what we tried to do in that book, using all this experience that Steve has, is kind of walk you through the steps of how to talk about Jesus with anyone. And now there's a website for the book. That makes me feel really happy. So I just want to give you the website, talkaboutjesusbook.com. Go to talkaboutjesusbook.com. You can buy it there. You can get some sample reading done. You can find out what it's all about. But maybe it's a book that you'll find helpful. You want to talk about family members, people at work, or about Jesus with family members or people at work, or wherever you are. You just want to be able to talk about Jesus with anyone. And you know what? You probably don't want to be that person who makes everybody uncomfortable. Guess what? One of the lessons in the book is you don't have to be that person who makes everybody uncomfortable. You might have to deal with some discomfort. We all do, all the time. But you don't have to be that person. Talkaboutjesusbook.com. How to talk about Jesus with anyone at talkaboutjesusbook.com. All right, Tom, I got more questions. Drop calls for you. This one came from Dan in St. Louis, Missouri. I was looking to see if you had any reaction to Missouri.
I lived in Missouri.
Oh, you lived in Missouri. Okay.
I went to grad school in Columbia, which is halfway between Kansas City and St. Louis.
Yeah.
Mid-Missouri.
Why do some people say Missouri and some people say Missouri?
That is
it's one of the great mysteries of life, isn't it? Nobody actually knows the answer to that.
I guess it's, again, an example of legitimate unity without uniformity. How about
I like
that?
it. I like it, Tom. Dan wanted to know this. Is there any reason to believe that God still punishes nations for being disobedient like he did in the Old Testament?
I wonder if he has like Sodom and Gomorrah in mind when Dan is asking that question. I think a lot of times...
I think he has St. Louis in mind, actually. Nah, probably not.
That's the gateway to the West. Come on now.
Yeah.
Great Catholic city, great Catholic heritage, St. Louis. But I would say, it's possible. But oftentimes God punishes us, I would argue, by giving us our own way. That is, we reap the whirlwind. That is, when you self-induced, as we see in America with abortion and other things like that, the breakdown of the family, the redefinition of marriage, we punish ourselves. But can there be cases in which people who have done stuff, countries or individuals, yeah, God can still do that. I remember there was somebody who denied, gosh, this is going back 30, 40 years, denied the resurrection, and lightning struck. It was in England and hit the tower and did some damage. So, yeah, I mean, I think there could be manifestations of that. Yeah, but a lot of times,
because some people felt that about Pope Benedict. Remember when Pope Benedict got on the helicopter or something, and then lightning hit the Vatican, or hit St. Peter's?
Yeah,
do you remember that?
Yeah, but of course you can have lightning hit, but some of these things are.
I don't know. I guess you just put me in the mind of it. I wasn't saying that God was punishing.
No.
Benedict.
That's just it, though. There was no damage, though, to the Vatican in the process. But
that's true.
This is the thing. I think we see it in terms of how God has helped the church when it's been on the defense, whether it's been at the Battle of Lepanto or at the Battle of Vienna, where the church was in difficult straits, and yet the God blessed the church and dare say punished the Muslims who are trying to overthrow Christianity.
Yeah.
So I think we still see that. I think we have to be mindful, though, about attributing too much to God's hand in terms of God sent this punishment. God can work through natural means, but oftentimes you can have tornadoes and hurricanes and typhoons and whatever else, earthquakes, that are part of being in a fallen world, and I wouldn't necessarily attribute too much to them. But bottom line is we know the moral law, and we don't need to have a human catastrophe to remind us of that. We've got enough going on in our lives to be able to realize that.
Dan, thank you. This next question comes from Ava in Ontario, Canada. Did you know Ava calls regularly? She's been calling for a few years.
That's great. And Ontario's the closest province to me growing up in Detroit. So I'm familiar
Does
with
everything have to point back to Michigan?
Well,
everything
you've been giving me a hard time about things I don't like, and so I thought I'd affirm that in Canada. And I watched
So the best thing
friendly...
about Ontario is that it borders Michigan. Is that what you're saying?
No,
the very best
we
thing
have
could say-
connections between them, and there's watching like Mr. Dressup and the Friendly Giant. Some of the older Canadian listeners will catch those.
So
references.
I don't know if you remember Jack Chick. I bet you do remember Jack Chick.
I do remember Jack Chick.
I say
Jimmy
remember
met
Jack
Jimmy Aiken
but I think
met.
he has passed. I think
Yes,
Jack,
he has.
And he's famous for what are called chick tracts, which are, I mean, they attack a lot of things, but mostly the Catholic Church. And so they're just wild. They look like such a product of their time when you look at them now. But they're about how if you're Catholic and you think you think the sacraments are going to save you, then you die and you wake up and Jesus is sending you to hell, and they're subtle in that way. They're beautiful, subtle works of art.
Kind of like an anvil off the top of the Empire State
Yeah.
Building.
So
subtle.
Jack Chick had a really strong belief that the Catholic Church was an evil that was leading people to hell, and so he made these little cartoon tracts that millions and millions of them have been given out. And so this is what Ava wanted to know. Jack Chick claimed the church marked Luther for death after he exposed the con job of selling indulgences. Is this true?
No. I mean, could you say that some people wanted Luther to be stopped? Sure, but the church had the power through its various means to take out Luther if they wanted to. But that wasn't the case. By the way, regarding indulgences, anyone who wants to read the 95 Theses, he was not against indulgences per se, but rather the abuse of indulgences. If you read that closely, Luther did not. Now, eventually goes...
But wait, let me just ask you something, okay? Because I do want to... Jack Chick he's not completely wrong in this, in that, Johannes Tetzel was preaching...
Okay.
Pretty close to the sale of... I mean, I don't want to make a cartoon out of Tetzel, but he was preaching a view of indulgences that we would certainly not embrace as Catholic.
Yeah, first of all, an indulgence is for the removal of the temporal punishment of already forgiven sin, as opposed to a get-out-of-jail-free card in advance of I can sin and it's okay.
Well, I was just worried about the fact that what Chick is saying is there was a con job of selling indulgences. It wasn't the church per se that was doing that, but there were people that did.
Well,
that.
they were certainly members of the church who acted badly. There were people who acted badly and gave the impression that simply giving the money without having true contrition or detachment from one's sin. I mean, that's what you have to have. The usual conditions of prayer for the Pope, detachment from sin, even venial sin. We're talking about getting a plenary indulgence. These are things that are involved. So this is to be detached from, because you can be forgiven and still have attachment to the sin or the consequences of sin. And so this is to eradicate that. It's just because one might be commit a sin and he's developed a vice, that just doesn't mean the vice is automatically gone once he goes to confession. He still has to deal with that vice and the consequences of it. And so anyway, the whole thing with indulgences is to recognize our personal contributions to sinfulness, and also the not just our own wrongdoing, but the consequences of our wrongdoing, both for ourselves and for others. And so that's what the whole remediation of indulgences, and we have many resources on our website, including tracts on indulgences. But yeah, I mean, mark Luther for death. Luther ended up living a long time. Unfortunately, he ended up, there are other people too that he fought with, including John Calvin. But it's ironic too, they talk about the devil and Jack Chicken, that the church is the tool of the devil, and yet Satanists, true devotees of the devil, will affirm, even if perversely, the reality of the real presence. They don't look for ordinary grape juice. They don't look for ordinary wine.
Oh, they go to Catholic churches?
They go to Catholic churches for the Eucharistic real thing. The devil knows his enemy. And so this is ironic that those who claimed that the church was for the devil, no, the devil knows otherwise, and that's why you have the perverse black mass. And then finally, with regard to Luther himself, he believed in a form of the Eucharist where a real presence. He didn't believe it as a sacrifice, but he did believe in the body and blood being present with the bread and wine. And so that itself, people will talk about, oh, isn't Luther great? But then it's like, well, we don't like him here, so everyone becomes his own pope or her pope, and they develop the doctrine a little more, so it becomes merely a symbol and not even...
In a weird way, it almost sounds like you're saying that Martin Luther, the actual Martin Luther,
yeah,
in some of his beliefs was closer to us Catholics than he was to Jack Chick.
Yes, definitely.
Jack Chick didn't know that probably, but yeah, that's
yeah. But Luther becomes the person because everyone latches on to him because he had the temerity, the audacity to go up against the Catholic Church. And by the way, all those, we don't have timelessness of Luther's, the true believers going back to the beginning of time. Luther himself was Catholic. Calvin was Catholic. All these people, the so-called reformers, were all Catholic, showing that this was a break in continuity, not a restoration from some church that was somehow in the hills or not as manifest, but still exist in all those years. It was a clear break which shows that the Catholic Church is there for 2,000 years.
Ava, I hope that was helpful to you. You're always helpful to us with your questions. Thank you for calling, and I hope you'll just keep continuing to call. Ontario's cool because it's right next to Michigan. Paul called from Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was listening on the Catholic Answers app. Thanks for downloading the app onto your phone, Paul. This is what he wanted to know. Is there a position that we should take when praying the Lord's Prayer during the Mass?
I would argue, and people would say, well, given how what happened with the Mass and get too complicated, I think the thing is that it's clear that Redemptionis Sacramentum, a document put out by the Congregation for Divine Worship, Discipline of the Sacraments, 2004, that we're not supposed to, the lay people are not supposed to emulate the postures of the priest. And this is to make a clear distinction between the lay and clerical roles in the celebration, the offering of the sacrifice of the Mass. So I would just encourage people, some people will talk about, because the priest has his arms spread out in the orans, they call it position. Some people do that. I would just encourage people just to have their hands clasped, whether folded together or, palm against palm, extended fingers. That would be the way, so that we distinguish ourselves and recognize the leadership of the priest in that regard, and avoid blurring distinctions, which can cause more problems, such as people doing other things that priests do, whether it's reading the homily or thinking they can consecrate, God forbid.
Well, what I like to do at the Mass, though, and I want to see at the Our Father, is pray it. I fold my hands like you just described. And I don't know. I don't think I always did that. I think I was in the hand-holding group for a while and whatever. But what I like to do, and I just want to run this by you, is judge other people who don't do it the way I do it. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think this is where we need to follow the lead of what the Church has. And when you're trying to encourage someone, it's important, do you know them? Do you have a relationship with them? You want to be building bridges with people. And also, having the priest address it, or the bishop, or if it doesn't, certain things that are going on that are clearly contrary to liturgical norms, not talking about so much this case, but that we don't let that disturb our peace, and we go to Mass and we celebrate, we participate joyfully, and we want to build communion with people wherever we can. And if people are doing something a little bit different, then like the holding of hands, which became more popular, not authorized.
Then it went away during COVID, man. But I just feel like wouldn't Jesus want us to be judging other people during Mass?
Well,
isn't that the?
Well, no, I mean,
feel like he would.
You feel like he would or wouldn't? being provocative here. I think Jesus wants us to be the best joyful witness we can be.
Praise God for that.
And in the process of that, unless something is doing something very disruptive during Mass and is clearly being a distraction, I think it's important to not let that rob us of our peace and to manifest love. And especially with the handshake of peace at that point, to say it joyfully, the peace of Christ be with you.
Yeah.
And to really,
And mean it.
Yes, and that way to let that person know that you love them, that you're joyful. If you want to have a good impression, if you want to make a good impact on someone, that's what you do.
Right back with more drop calls for Tom Nash, who loves him some Michigan, right after this on Catholic Answers Live. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Do you have what it takes to defend your Catholic faith? The work of apologetics takes study, practice, and skill, but more than anything, it takes spiritual strength. The Soul of Apologetics, a new prayer resource from Catholic Answers, gives you the spiritual tools every Catholic apologist needs: prayers, meditations, and scripture-based reflections to build up the interior life. Order your copy of The Soul of Apologetics today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Tom Nash is our guest, and we've got drop calls today. We're answering questions that we would have liked to answer when the person was on the phone, but they didn't stay for one reason or another. So we said, let's answer those. And here's a question I don't believe I've seen before. So this is one of the fun things about drop calls is we get to save up these calls that are a little more unusual, a little more off the beaten track. John in Houston, Texas was listening on EWTN radio. And John wanted to know, was there ever a covenant made with the absence of blood? I honestly, I don't even know the context for that question. Like, I'm not sure why it's an interesting question, but
yeah.
It's coming from a place where I'm not sure where it's coming from. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say in terms of salvation history, no, because, you see Exodus 24 with the Old Covenant, there was the sacrifice offering of blood. You see it in various times throughout salvation history and according with our Lord, with his offering, the sacrifice, that there is a new covenant in my blood, which is referencing in some ways the Old Covenant, the Exodus 24, so that it is the blood and the life is in the blood, and that seals the covenant. So I would say in terms of salvation history that no, not that all sacrifices involve blood, but that a covenant per se, there would typically be that. You see this too with Abraham back in the day in Genesis 15, where there is the sacrifice of animals and the smoking brazier, as they say, goes between the divided parts of the animals. So we see this throughout salvation history, that covenants are made with the shedding of blood, the offering of sacrifice, and as a result of that, they all point to our Lord, and his all those lambs, etc., the goats, all point to our Lord who offers himself on our behalf in the Eucharist, which it is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. But when we offer it, because he suffered and died once, but it culminated in everlasting glory in the heavenly sanctuary, that we are able to partake of it in a bloodless manner. That is, he does not suffer anew. He does not shed his blood anew. That happens once, but yet the sacrifice, the totality of the sacrifice was brought into the heavenly sanctuary. That's why we see the Lamb in Revelation 5 standing as though slain because marks of the passion and death, standing in triumph of his resurrection and ascension. So the totality of the Eucharist, of the sacrifice of Calvary, is brought into the heavenly sanctuary, then brought to us according to the order of Melchizedek, which is why Jesus says, "This is my body, this is my blood." That is to follow the model of Melchizedek, who in Genesis 14 brought out bread and wine. So we see all these various sacrifices. That'd be a whole nother show. We've done it on Mass, but that the sacrifice of the Mass fulfills all the Old Covenant sacrifice, all the Old Testament sacrifices, in particular Passover, Yom Kippur / Day of Atonement, and Melchizedek.
John, thank you very much. Appreciate that. We had an anonymous caller who called from Rome, Georgia, watching on YouTube. How do I help reach out to my Protestant friend who is losing his faith and in a dark place?
I think we just need to stay the course with family and friends and maintain that communication side, because sometimes we can let certain differences alienate ourselves from one another. And even if it's communication where we're calling them or sending them an email or sending them a card for their birthday, even if there's strains and that, I would just say reach out to your friend, let him see your joy, pray with him, offer to pray with him. Ask him to pray for you too, because when we show our vulnerability and ask people to pray for us, it connects them back with God. And so that could be a legitimate way of showing that you need God, and yet it's also opening up to say, hey, I'm asking for your help, and the same God who I want you to have faith in, would you please pray to him on my behalf, because I know I've benefited and I know that as a friend you can do that for me. So I would stay the course and just be a good friend and see what good fellowship you can have gathering together. As we've said before, we talked about this on the feast, or the optional memorial of the Holy Name of Jesus earlier this month, Si, that football could be a great way for guys to get together, and where there could be unexpected evangelistic opportunities when people misuse the name of the Lord, particularly the name of Jesus, when they don't like something going on in the game, that you say, praise be his name.
Amen, brother. Anonymous, thank you. Wayne was in Middletown, Ohio. You okay to take this one?
Sure.
Okay. Wayne was in Middletown, Ohio. He was watching on our website, Catholic.com. Is it possible to say that Jesus could have looked at all the apostles when he says, "Upon this rock I will build my church"?
No, because there's a play on Peter's name. He's speaking to Peter, and in the Greek, as it's translated in the Gospel of Matthew, it's Petros for Peter and Petra, and people try to make a big deal of that, saying, oh, it's two different people. But no, upon this rock I will build my church. That's what Peter means. And then we see even St. Paul in Galatians 2, among other places, where Peter is called Cephas, right? Or Cephas, Cephas, or Kepha is a rock. Clearly, in that case, Jesus is talking to Peter, Simon, and renaming him Peter. And so it's clearly a one-on-one conversation that the Pope and his successors have primacy, I would say, to Wayne. But in addition to that, though, as St. Paul affirms, and of course under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 to 22, that he also built Jesus Christ, the cornerstone, built the church upon the foundation of the apostles. So Peter has a primacy. Of course, there is no reality of the church without Christ, but yet Christ built it on the human person of Peter and his successors, and of course upon the foundation of the apostles in general. But Peter still has primacy, so both and there.
Wayne, I hope that's helpful to you. We hear a lot of arguments the one that says Jesus is not talking to Peter just never strikes me as strong because he changed his name to Peter. Like,
yes, and it's right there. It's clearly he's having a conversation.
You would have to say to yourself, Jesus changed Peter's name from Simon to a name that means rock, and then addressed him and said, "Upon this rock I will build my church." And you have to say, it doesn't mean anything that he changed his name to rock. Like,
you're right. You'd have to rewrite the gospel. You'd have to rewrite the gospel. You'd have to. I mean,
there's a lot of good arguments. That's not one.
No. And yes, yet at the same time, as we see with St. Paul in Ephesians 2, there is the church is built on the foundation of the apostles, and that's true because the successors, apostolic succession, is fundamental to the church. And yet, there's the primacy of Peter because Jesus made it that way, not because we think it's the best way.
Wayne, again, thank you very much. I got time before the break to do this one. Joseph was in Alabama when he called, and he wanted to know, what can I do? If my pastor has requested me not to kneel for communion, how do I move forward?
Well, I would say, Joseph, you have the right to kneel. The church has affirmed your right to kneel. This is dealt with in a dubium earlier this century in the 2000s, where the Congregation for the Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments says, for example, the United States of America, that the norm is to bow as showing a sign of reverence. Everyone should show some sign of reverence because they're becoming in presence of and communing with intimately and receiving the Eucharist with our Lord Jesus Christ. But again, unity does not mean uniformity. And so I would say to your pastor that this is allowed. We have on our website where you can have a citation and to point that to him, and if necessary, I would take it to your bishop, and you have a right to do that. So, again, when we do kneel for communion, people should sometimes, and I think it's great where parishes have had pray-dos. If they don't have at the altar rail, they'll have a pray-do. Some bishops have forbidden that, at least for the present time, but they cannot forbid kneeling. And for example, I think a good example of that is Bishop Michael Martin in Charlotte, North Carolina. He has said to his people, even though he wants them to stand, that he recognizes their right to kneel. So it's very clear that exists, and I'd share that with your pastor if necessary. But I would take it to your bishop and perhaps the dean of your local.
It doesn't say that his priest mandated it, though. It said he requested me not to kneel for communion. So I want to throw one thing out to you.
Okay.
One thing you could do is just do what your pastor requested and take it as a penance.
You could. And yet, our friend Jonathan Rumi plays Jesus on.
I'm not saying you have to. I'm not obligating. You could. He said, how do I move forward? Well, one way to move forward is just do what your pastor requested.
You could, but yet I think he should not feel compelled to do that. And I think you can say, well, there's an option that the church has given me, and if he sounds like he's feeling uncomfortable and maybe not wanting to cross his pastor, but I'm just trying to give him a reassurance that he's in the right and can do so. And so you're right, he could do that as a penance, and at the same time, though, he should realize that can be an expression of reverence that is certainly affirmed by the church. And so to charitably disagree with his pastor and go to a higher authority. I mentioned deans, the head of a local deanery, there's typical subregions within a parish or within a diocese, and there was a particular priest who was over a deanery, but talking to the bishop, vicar general is probably an expeditious way to do that, if necessary. Try to resolve it at the local level. And if you want to,
I'm not trying to argue it, but one way to resolve it is just do what the pastor requested you to do.
I agree.
I'm not saying the pastor has a right to demand this of you, but if he says, look, we have this weird architecture here in the church, it just doesn't work to have everybody do that. Could you please not? You could say, Father, I would prefer to receive on my knees, but out of respect for you as the pastor, I'll do what you ask me to do. What's wrong with that?
There's nothing if you want to do that, but yet what's wrong is potentially where a pastor would say, would want to, despite what the church has allowed, to nullify that, and he's got to be submissive to authority himself in recognizing that. So I think it's a both and I think somebody who wants to kneel should not feel compelled, and they have the right to kneel, and let's not make a bigger deal out of it than it has to be. So it's a both and if you want to kneel, if you don't want,
I don't dispute what you have a right to do.
No.
And we don't always have to vindicate our rights. Sometimes we can just give up our rights.
I agree, and you are a man who manifests holiness in that way that you can defer.
By being lazy and doing whatever people tell me to do.
No,
I know.
Did I say that?
No, you didn't.
But I'm
said that.
saying that you would show that you can be deferential to authority for the sake of a witness to others, of being humble and showing, there's a bigger picture here, and so that's a witness too. There's a plurality in how one can respond to this situation.
Sure, yeah. Joseph in Alabama, thank you very much for the call. We're going back to Alabama. A second call, 2 calls in a row. Alabama, big day for the state of Alabama. Right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on, Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, when we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue. Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
This is Monsignor Chuck Kosanke. We need Catholic radio to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ to the whole world as a modern means to reach the hearts and minds of Catholics and all people, and to have the Church's teaching proclaimed and taught authentically, and also to convey the Church's news from an authentic perspective.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Catholic Answers Live. Tom Nash, our guest. Tom, thanks for coming in for 2 hours. I know you didn't expect to be here for 2 hours today, but look at you.
Coming out of the bullpen.
Do whatever we need.
Praise God.
Yeah. We just took a call from Alabama, or we read a call from Alabama. This one comes from Aaron, who's in Mobile, or was in Mobile, Alabama, listening on Archangel Radio when he made this call. Aaron wanted to know, would it be immoral for an unwed woman to adopt an embryo?
There's a debate among moral theologians on this. I would argue against, simply because it encourages the whole in vitro fertilization industry, which is going against, as the Church has noted in its documents, making the conception of a child, a product of a scientific experiment instead of that of a loving union of father and mother. There are various things that would that become a problem in terms of IVF in various ways, not just in how the children are created, but in terms of selective reduction, which is a nice way of saying we're going to have multiple embryos, fertilize multiple human persons, but then these ones we're going to, whether before or after the pregnancy begins, or the implantation begins, I should say, you got person in there in any event, we're going to reduce, we're going to eliminate, we're going to kill them. Or you can also have the farming out, where some guy, the whole sperm bank stuff, and he's the father, it was on 60 Minutes, CBS, father of 430 kids, and these kids wanted to know who their dad was, and he was popular because he was supposed to be brighter in this, and yet the kids had this yearning, and who's my dad? And to realize you got 430 kids that you contribute as the father, God have mercy. That would be a day of reckoning, but God is there amidst all of our challenges. But I would say I would argue against it. Some people, I know of somebody who did, and they couldn't get pregnant, and they did adopt an embryo, and the child. Again, we're talking about not that these aren't children. IVF children are still children, but it's the manner in which they are conceived, and the whole IVF industry and process that's problematic. And I think the best way for us is to intercede for the unborn children, knowing that God, even though they will maybe perish within these, what do we call them, inside of the, shall we say, holding tanks.
I don't know what to call
Yeah.
them. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
though,
but
yeah.
in the deep freeze, that God has his hand on them, and we commend them to God. And I would say, hey, get involved with adoption if possible, including a child from outside this country, or being a big brother or a foster parent. I would look for those who are already born and alive than to look for adopting an embryo.
All right. Thank you very much, Aaron. Let's go to Rudy, who called from Georgia, was listening on the Catholic Answers app. There's a little button on the Catholic Answers app where you can just call right into this studio. Did you know that, Tom? You have the app on your phone. You can just call right in.
Outstanding.
So maybe Rudy did that. How can we justify praying to Mary and the saints to Protestants?
I would say because we can pray ourselves, and people, we ask ourselves to pray for each other, right? St. Paul speaks about this in 1 Timothy chapter 2, the first few verses. We intercede for others, and people say, well, yeah, but they're dead. They can't hear us. It's like, well, wait a minute. We're not talking necromancy. We're not talking Ouija boards. We're not talking the case of where Samuel with the witch of Endor, where Saul was seeking to speak to the prophet Samuel, etc. We're talking about people who are alive in God. Jesus says, I am the God of the living, not of the dead, in Matthew 22. And that, in other words, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they are alive to him. And we see this beautifully in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 23, where it says that in writing about this vision of heaven that we've come to, seeing Christ there in heaven, but also to the souls of just men, spirits of just men made perfect, that they have been perfected, even though they haven't been reunited with their bodies yet. That'll come at the resurrection of the dead, at the second coming of our Lord Jesus, but that they've been perfected. And it's like, my goodness, if they've been perfected, if the prayer of a righteous man on earth avails much, as it says in James chapter 5, I believe verse 16, how much more somebody who's gone before us? How much more somebody who's had their soul perfected, that they can intercede for us? And we see as well as our Blessed Mother in heaven, Revelation 12, chapter 12, verse 17. She is, the devil goes to make war on those who, on her offspring, the rest of her offspring. Well, she only had Jesus, but we are her spiritual offspring. She's our spiritual mother. And that, those who keep the commandments and bear testimony to Jesus. Well, what mother is not concerned about her children? And again, we see that all this is possible in Christ. It's not against Christ. It's not without Christ. This communion of saints that we talk about, St. Paul speaks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12 to 26. All the members, if one member of the body is concerned, all are concerned, one who's suffering or one who's celebrating, So if you have this unity in Christ, then yes, indeed, you can have it, because it's very biblically based and it's testified to in the early church, both East and West. And unfortunately, it's a latter-day development that rejects asking for the prayers of the saints. And just as I would say, we would never say to each other, well, hey, don't ask me to pray for you, Si. Go to Jesus. Why are you going through me? No, it's a both and. We pray for ourselves, but we ask others. There's solidarity in prayer. These are not God's competitors, not God's adversaries. They are collaborators in God's ministry. And that's why we ask for the help of the angels and the saints, because, as Patrick Madrid said so well in his book, any friend of God is a friend of mine.
Amen. All right. I do have to tell Edgar, I think Edgar organized these calls. He made a terrible error.
Uh-oh.
The next question is about Armageddon. You start with a question about, you don't save Armageddon to the end of the show.
Well,
Armageddon is first. If someone asks an Armageddon question, that's call number one.
I don't know.
Just for future reference, Edgar. That's call number one, Armageddon. All right. Dan in Fargo, North Dakota, was listening on Real Presence Radio, and he said, what is the Catholic understanding of Armageddon in Revelation?
We believe that there is going to be, at the end of times, there'll be a tremendous trial for the church. This is talked about in Catechism 675 to 677. A lot of the stuff, again, we speak of latter-day dispensationalism. There's a whole development where they believe there's going to be Armageddon. Then Jesus comes back. And there's the rapture. and then Jesus comes back and rules the church, or rules Israel, the kingdom, for 1,000 years, failing to see, quite frankly, that Jesus Christ started his kingdom when he died and rose from the dead. And that's what they realized, much as they still wanted maybe a political, military manifestation on earth as the Old Covenant kingdom, we see that St. Peter, they never asked that question again, and that's why they testify in Acts chapter 2, and also where Peter's talking about comparing David, whose tomb is with us to this day, to our Lord Jesus Christ, who died and risen from the dead. This is the kingdom which is very visible in terms of his authority structure. Jesus reigns from heaven, and yet he's with us, always with us, as he says in Matthew 28:20, in the Eucharist. So anything of a Catholic understanding of Armageddon will be a persecution of the church in the latter days. But there's not going to be this rapture. There's not going to be this, Christ coming back because he's reigning right now with his church. This is also affirmed in, among other places, James in chapters 15 of the Council of Jerusalem, Acts 15. So the kingdom of Christ, it's interesting because they say, well, no, these were the teachings for the Jews, not for the Gentiles. But what has Jesus said? Make disciples of all nations, teaching them all that I have commanded you. They will try this going a little far afield, but it's related to this dispensationalism. They will try to divide the teachings of Christ, particularly in the Sermon on the Mount and other teachings, from the pure gospel of saved by faith, through grace, which they reduce St. Paul to, even though St. Paul talked about mortal sins and how we can go astray, such as in Romans chapter 2, 4-9, where he speaks about, we will reap what we sow. So I would say to the person, that there'll be an end time activity, but
wait, does that mean? And you got to clarify that. End time activity.
I'm sorry.
Is there going to be a giant war at the end of the
world?
world?
Well, there's going to be. We don't know how it's going to manifest, but there will be a persecution of the church, as there's been in various times throughout the church. But God is with us, and God will see us through. And no, there's not going to be a rapture, and no, there's not going to be, I dare say, rebuilding of the temple or restoration of all that, precisely because all those were fulfilled in Jesus Christ in the Eucharist and the offering of the Mass.
Dan, I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you for a question about Armageddon. Anybody who wants to go first from now on, just call and ask about Armageddon. I'll put you in front of everybody. Michael's in Arkansas. He was listening on our website, Catholic.com. He asked, why doesn't the Pope always speak infallibly?
Well, this is why we looked at Jesus Christ. He doesn't need to speak infallibly all the time because we've already got the deposit of faith. We already have the divine revelation. He's to be safeguarding that. It's when needed, he speaks definitively. That's why we see in the early church we have the deposit of faith, and that's why in the 3rd century, even when the divinity of Christ is questioned by Arius, well, then the church steps in. So the whole thing of infallibility is meant as a safeguard side. It's not meant as if the Pope is the last word on everything. Well, he is the safeguarder. He's the preserver of the deposit of faith. He can't reject it. He cannot make new doctrine that contradicts it, right?
Yeah.
And so we realize that it's Christ's church ultimately. He's the vicar of Christ and not vice versa. That is, we look to Christ, we have the deposit of faith, and he need not speak infallibly because we do have that deposit of faith, but he does need to safeguard it and clarify it when it's attacked.
I didn't know how you were going to answer that, and I love it. You surprised me. But look, you have the deposit of faith. You have the scriptures. You have the traditions of the church. You don't need the Pope every day speaking infallibly. Only when things need a clarification does he have to do it.
Amen.
Oh, that's very helpful to think about it that way. Amen. Makes you feel good too. Like, oh, we do have an awful lot. Like, you're not going to need the Pope.
No. I'm glad we need the Pope, and we're blessed because God has given us the Vicar of Christ, and glad we can get through all these questions.
Tom, I really am grateful that you came in and did 2 hours with us today. Thanks very much for doing it.
Praise God, brother.
That will do it for us. If you're in the Washington, D.C. area, I think it's tomorrow is the big pro-life walk, the Walk for Life out here on the West Coast. San Francisco is the big one, and that is which day, Darren?
Saturday. 24th.
And then One Life LA, which is growing, and at least as far as I know, and it's been pretty good. That's
I think it's same day,
that's
24th.
Saturday, yeah. And pray for life on this celebration or commemoration of the Roe versus Wade 53rd anniversary, and we'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here. on Catholic Answers Live.